Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining myself and Andy Latham. And we are here to talk today to do kind of a Q&A on hybrid electric vehicle and hybrid vehicle dismantling. Andy, of course, is an industry expert and consultant on the issue, also the founder and CEO of Salvage Wire. And so, Andy, before we get started, I want to give you a couple seconds to just talk to us about your experience, your education. I mean, your just total experience in this space and Salvage Wire.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Vince. I've been in the automotive industry over 40 years. I know I don't look that old, but I started when I was 4, and came up through the retail side of the industry. Got to after sales manager for a franchise dealer, and then joined the UK's biggest insurer as a staff engineer, as a vehicle damage assessor. Did 10 years of that, and then moved into Blue Cycle, which was their wholly owned salvage subsidiary, and did 13 years there in the salvage side of the industry. That work got outsourced 8 years ago to another company, and we were all made redundant. And I'd already started being interested in electric and hybrid vehicles. So Salvage Wire was formed. I initially to be a consultancy company to the industry, but it's morphed into really sort of 65–70% of the work we do is electric and hybrid work on, and we're working right across the industry. We're working with universities and research and development people at one end who are looking at new technology and new innovations, and we're working with the salvage and the recycling industries at the other end, looking at dismantling the vehicles and recycling the components, and everybody else in between. I was working on one day last week with vehicle repairers, people who've got to repair the vehicles and do things like that. So, I'm bookend. Everything I do is bookended by, universities, R&D at one end and scrap and recycling at the other.
Yeah, I didn't realize that you and I had something in common on our resumes. I worked as a claims. I started as a claims adjuster and in the auto side of a major insurance company here, and then moved up to a claims branch manager. So I worked for that company for about 8 years. I learned a ton. I loved it, and it was a good job. But we have that in common.
Yeah, indeed.
And ARA is privileged to have Andy as our consultant on all things hybrid and electric vehicle. He's been a tremendous resource for ARA and for the auto recycling industry in general. We have recently launched on ARA University Andy's full training module on EVs and hybrids, and you want to plug that for a second, and then we'll talk about your webinar and we'll get to some questions.
Okay, yeah, sure. During the course of last year, we were able to write a new EV manual for the ARA, which is also available on the ARA University, and that builds on the manuals that are already available from the ARA. We had the original hybrid vehicle dismantling guide, and then how to recycle end-of-life hybrid batteries were the 2 previous manuals, and now this one builds on that and adds to the knowledge base. And from that, we then developed 8 training modules that are also available on the ARA University for everybody to take and to learn about handling and dealing with electric and hybrid vehicles.
Very good. Yeah, I would encourage any ARA member to log in and check that out on ARA University. And if you're watching this and you're a member of the auto recycling industry and you're not an ARA member, we can certainly help you become a member. And then the ARA University, the hybrid and EV training, along with all of the other training available on the university, is a free member benefit once you're a member. So would love to help people get connected with that resource, because we put a lot of energy into that. I know Andy does, and ARA has, on different topics for training. So the ARA University is a fantastic resource for the industry. Andy, it's really, I mean, you can't go anywhere or turn on the news or listen to anything these days without hearing about electric vehicles, more so than hybrids anymore, right? Because what, 10, 15 years ago, hybrids was the new thing. And now not so much. Everybody's really focused on electric vehicles, fully electric vehicles. So let's talk about how that's impacting the auto recycling industry now and what you see as an impact in the future, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter whether it's a fully electric vehicle or whether it's a hybrid vehicle. Both of the vehicles work on high voltage, and high voltage is a serious issue. I only need between 70 and 90 volts DC direct current to stop somebody's heart from beating. The Toyota Prius is running at 200 volts. The Tesla is running at 400 volts. And the new Porsche Taycan and the new Hyundai and Kia platform is 800 volt DC batteries. So the prime consideration here, doesn't matter what type of vehicle it is, whether it's electric, plug-in hybrid, or just a standard hybrid, the prime consideration here is to keep people safe. And if what we do today saves one person's life, then we've done our job.
Yeah. Yeah. So as these vehicles begin, and they've certainly already have begun, but as they continue to come in larger numbers to our auto recycling facilities, let's talk about what our industry, what these facilities has to do in order to prepare their actual work environment and their people. So how will the processing areas be impacted as we see more and more hybrid and electric vehicles come in?
Yeah, could I actually switch that around a little bit and actually talk about people first? Because the key consideration here is to actually understand what the risks are. And the key consideration here is looking at the potential risk. There's a potential for electric shock, obviously. There's also, as with any vehicle, there's a potential for fire. And I'm not saying that these vehicles will catch fire more often than any other vehicle. It's just that if they do catch fire, then there's some very, very serious consequences. And then also, if the battery has been damaged, then there could be the potential for electrolyte leakage. And the first thing that really needs to happen is that everybody in the business needs to understand where the risks are and what they need to do to mitigate, to eradicate these risks as much as possible. And a lot of that is actually down to the correct training and the correct tools and the personal protective equipment. And then you then move into the processes around how the car is processed through the business and what happens through the business. But you have to start with people understanding where the risks are. So you've got to start with people first and then move on to the tools and the PPE and the process that runs through the business.
Yeah, and you mentioned the potential for a thermal event, right? A fire. And when it happens with one of these batteries, it is my understanding it is far more difficult to extinguish than a normal fuel fire, right?
Yeah. Well, firstly, you've got to take a lithium-ion battery, for example, and you've got multiple cells. The way the batteries are designed, there's multiple cells, and if one of those cells catches fire, it then gets hot, and the one next to it catches fire, and then the one next to it. It's like a chain reaction.
Yeah.
And you can put the fire out, but because of the heat that's generated within the battery, there is a very, very strong risk that battery will reignite. And the fire services, and I do a lot of work with the fire services, the Fire Service College here in the UK, for example, are telling me that for one electric vehicle, they need 10,000 litres of water. That's about 2,600, 2,500 gallons of water in an hour. And the reason they need that is they've got to cool that battery down. That's a massive amount of water going onto somebody's yard, onto somebody's business in a very, very short space of time. Now, the problem that we have is that the average fire truck doesn't carry anywhere near that level of water. So you're looking at a hydrant and a pump. and that's not the sort of thing that's going to arrive on site with you in
Right.
a very short space of time. So by the time the fire services do arrive and they are able to cope with one of these fires, you've got a vehicle burning out of control, possibly taking a lot of other stuff with it. And in tests that we've done over the last few years, we have seen temperatures in excess of 1,000 degrees centigrade from one of these batteries on fire. So it is a massive incident if one of these catches fire, and that's what the fire services are telling me. That's the sort of thing that needs to happen. And you're thinking, hang on a minute, I've got 2,500 gallons of water in under an hour pouring onto my site. Where's that runoff? Where's that water going to go?
Yeah. And what's it carrying with it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So any fire is a major incident on these vehicles. Yeah.
So we've talked about the danger that it poses to humans, right? To the people. We've talked about what happens and how intense a thermal event can be. It really, one of my questions was how important is it to have suitable standards in our business when dealing with electric vehicles? I think we just answered that. Unless you have anything else to add to that, why we need standards.
Yeah, absolutely. Because and when we look at standards, when we look at processes, particularly processes in the yard, is that vehicle's coming into the yard. So who's receiving that vehicle? Is that vehicle being received into a specific quarantined area where if it does catch fire, because you've got no idea what condition that vehicle's in, but if it does come in, are you putting it into a quarantined area where if it does catch fire, it's not going to be a major problem? It's not going to take in other vehicles or buildings or something of that nature. But also who's looking at it? Who's inspecting it? Who's doing the appraisal on that vehicle? Are they qualified? Do they know what they're doing? Do they know how to make the vehicle safe, or to check it and test it to see if it is safe to actually approach? So you're looking at processes all the way through this.
And I would think, to go one step before what you just said, being able to identify, right? Not everybody can look at a vehicle and know that it's an electric vehicle or a hybrid vehicle. Sometimes they're badged. Maybe the badge got knocked off. Maybe they didn't see the badge. But just to say, if a facility gets a truckload of vehicles, whoever's receiving them has to be able to identify, and maybe that's something in the future that from the point of sale, maybe it can be flagged so that as soon as it comes in and it's in a truckload, you may not know what it looks like, but maybe you get notified that I know that there's an EV or a hybrid on here somewhere, right? And I've got to look for it and handle it accordingly. What can we learn from the UK and Europe about processing hybrids and electric vehicles?
It's a learning process. It's a learning process all the time. We're a little bit ahead of you as far as volume of vehicles is concerned. So we've got a bit more experience around these, and it's getting the people trained. It's getting the people aware. So you need some levels of training. Everybody in the business needs to be informed. They need to know what they're dealing with, so they can actually identify the electric and hybrid vehicle, whether it's identified from the paperwork that accompanies the vehicle, or whether it's identified from clues on the vehicle, be it badges that you mentioned just now. There could be a charge point, a plug somewhere that you can plug it in that you can see, or even just lifting the hood and seeing bright orange cables. And bright orange cables signify that the voltage in those cables is in excess of 60 volts direct current, 60 DC. And if it's got a bright orange cable, then there's voltage in excess of 60 volts. Immediately deem that to be high voltage. Now, you actually said before from the point of sale. So we're reliant then on the people selling the vehicle to put a sticker or some notification on. That doesn't always happen.
No.
But that's one of the key factors. It's that initial identification. And if the people selling the vehicle don't do that job properly, then the people receiving the vehicle need to be informed. They need to know what they're dealing with. And then you need to then have competent and authorized people who can then take over and actually deal with that vehicle.
Yeah, yeah, no, it clearly at the onset you would want to. I mean, you can imagine how much damage and injury could be avoided by starting with an awareness campaign. You know, with the people who engage a vehicle first when it comes through the gate. You know, making them aware. You know, the orange cables indicating excess of 60. Volts direct current.
60 volts,
you mentioned earlier, didn't you mention earlier that at 90 it will stop the heart?
Between 70 and 90.
70 and 90. So that you know, that is significant, and making sure that your people at the very, very front of the supply chain, when that vehicle comes in, understand to look for that more and more, because it's gonna happen more and more frequently.
Absolutely.
What would you say are the costs? So if I'm operating a facility and I'm staying away from EVs, I'm staying away from hybrids, but now I want to start getting into it. I want to have the right training. What do you estimate would be the cost for the necessary equipment to begin to safely process, dismantle, and warehouse the pieces off of an electric vehicle or a hybrid vehicle?
Yeah, well, you know, again, you've got to go back to people again. The first thing you've got to do is train your people. And there is training out there, and various different levels of training out there. And we've actually developed quite a few of these now that are available online as well. So we don't have to travel to site; we can do it online and do online training. And that's, you know, running at anything from about $200 to $600 per person, depending on the level of training that you're looking for. And all of that is accredited. It's all accredited training as well. Then you've got to look at your tools and your PPE, which you're looking somewhere, you know, for the basics, you're looking somewhere at about $1,100 for something of that nature. And then you have the location where you're actually doing the work. And you need, you know, just basically just a location. Depends type of vehicle. Some vehicles, the batteries come out from the inside of the vehicle, so you're going to need a crane or something like that to lift them out because of the weight of the batteries. Other batteries are bolted up underneath the vehicle, so you need to have a ramp that you can move up and down, and then you roll a table underneath the vehicle, drop the car down onto a table, finish unbolting the battery, and lift the car away on the table. And you know, you can. You know, you may well have a ramp on site that can do that, and all you need is just a table on wheels that's capable of carrying about 1,400 pounds in weight, because the Tesla battery, Jaguar I-Pace battery, is about that sort of weight. So just to put that in perspective, that's about 8 of us.
Yeah. So do you think, in regards to the table, do you have to be concerned about? Should you be concerned about, you know, the table being constructed of conductive material, or should you have a rubber top on it?
Yeah.
Like
you could put a wood or a rubber top on it, or even just use a pallet.
Right. Yeah. And then when it comes to warehousing, I mean, there's been a lot of different opinions about, you know, warehouse it inside, warehouse it outside, climate control. What are your thoughts on warehousing it?
Well, there's a couple of things to think of here.
Obviously, we're talking about specifically the batteries, not the rest of the car.
Yeah. But number one is that you need, you know, because of the weight of the batteries, you've got to be able to roll them in and out using manual handling processes. You've then also got to keep the chemistry separate. So you have to put nickel metal hydride one side, lithium ion the other side of a storage container. And the final thing really is temperature. If they get too hot, then they get destroyed. They will not operate. If they get too cold, you know, and I'm talking here temperatures well into the minuses, then again it could damage the batteries. So
you have to find a place to store them where they're not going to get too hot, they're not going to get too cold, and they have to be separate.
Yeah. As I say, you could put nickel metal hydride one side of the container, lithium ion the other side, with a walkway through the middle. Absolutely fine.
Oh, okay, yeah. So a container could work as long as it's not going to get too hot or too cold.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. What are the recommended training per se for an EV tech? What would you recommend an EV tech go through?
We would like an EV tech to go to what we call level 3, which would be the same as an authorized person. So you've got 4 or maybe 5 levels of training here. Level 1 is just informed; it's just aware, it's informed. Level 2, level 3, and then level 4 and master level, which I'm at. But level 3 would be for somebody who is removing the high voltage battery, particularly the high voltage battery. Level 3 would be a minimum. They are the person that can work on the vehicle when it's live and make it safe, but that does not discharge the battery. The battery's still got power within it. So then they would be the person that would remove the high voltage battery. Once they've made it safe, once they've cut the power and they've made it safe, other components could be removed by a level 2 competent person. So the inverter, the converter, the electric motor, the air conditioning pump, and things like that can all be removed by a level 2 qualified person. But the level 3 should really be the person that's doing the making safe and then removing and storing the battery.
So just to be clear, even though you've had a level 3 person disconnect the power, right? You still wouldn't want a completely untrained, somebody who's used to dismantling a regular combustion engine vehicle, and hasn't had no training on an EV, you still would not recommend to have that person come over. Even though the battery's been disconnected and discharged or whatever, you still don't want somebody who's completely untrained on an EV to come in behind, to make the mistake that thinking once the battery's disconnected or removed, it's just like an ICE vehicle.
No. For example, the electric motor, if the part of the motor is actually connected directly to the drive wheels, and if you turn the drive wheels, it will generate power.
Without the battery, you're generating power now, and you're back charging the system, right?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
So
So it's little things like that those people really need to be aware of and know.
Yeah, very good. So we know that we know that there are resources. Why don't we talk about where the resources are for this training?
Obviously, I mean, the first port of call for everybody should be ARA University, and that should be the first port of call. There's manuals, there's training available on there as well. Then contact me. As I say, we've got training right up to level 3 that we can do for you, and a lot of that we can do remotely as well without any problem at all. Sensible levels of training. A lot of it's video based as well, with a practical assessment that we do at the end of it. And then there's plenty of other training operators around the US as well, around the world. One of my good friends is Craig Van Battenberg at Fix Hybrid up in Worcester, Massachusetts. Again, he does a lot of training, and would strongly recommend him as well as the work that I can do. And there are many others around.
What should ARA members do to make sure that they're prepared to handle these vehicles?
Well, as we said earlier, number 1 is the training.
Yeah.
And then number 2 is having the right personal protective equipment and the tools to do the job, and then the processes that keep everybody safe. So everybody knows what their job is and everybody knows what their role is.
Right. So as we wrap this up, let's talk about the future for a couple seconds. What do you think the future looks like for electric vehicles and volume, legislation? What's your thoughts? What do you see?
Well, you have to look at particularly at the moment, legislation. We've already got legislation in the UK that is saying no more brand new internal combustion engine vehicles from 2030 onwards. Norway have got that from 2025. That's already in legislation. California, 2035. British Columbia, 2040. And other nations, other states are also going to follow suit as well, because the ultimate aim here is that they have to, and as we've seen in the last week with the climate conferences and everything else, they have to reduce the carbon emissions. We're currently running at 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. 100 years ago, it was 250 parts per million. It's now 400.
Mm-hmm.
And if I go back in history, and if I go back to the archaeologists, the dinosaurs, they got killed off when the CO2 reached 800 parts per million. We have to do something around the CO2 that we're pumping into the atmosphere, because if we don't, then our children, our grandchildren are going to be accusing us of failing them.
Right.
And that's where we have to go. And one of these, we've got used to having cars, we've got used to having personal mobility, and we have to reduce the emissions that are coming out of those vehicles. Doesn't matter whether it's what size of vehicle, and this is also then going to go into planes and flight. This is also going to go into shipping as well, and it's not going to be just electric. Okay, there are going to be other things coming along as well. Hydrogen is one of the fuels that's going to come into use in the next few years, and that will come into heavy commercial vehicles, because they don't want to have 4 tons of batteries in the vehicle,
right?
Because that hits payload. So they're going to go hydrogen, and that will then, once they've established, that will then trickle down into cars. And people like myself, I mean, I'm regularly doing 250, 300, 350 mile days. For people like me who do big mileage, hydrogen will be the way to go. Mm-hmm. For people who might only do 50 or 60, maybe even 100 miles a day, then electric is going to be the way to go. So, we're going to have that, and then looking future. There's talk at the moment about synthetic fuels, but that, if I'm honest, is going to be 12, 15, maybe even 20 years away.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, regardless, there's obviously a lot of people have different perspectives on this, but there's no way to deny that electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, they're going to continue to increase in volume. Obviously, in a lot of cases, we're going to see legislation that's going to encourage that growth. And if you anticipate staying in the auto recycling industry, this is some very, very valuable and important. There's money to be made, and as long as you approach it safely and well trained and well aware, business can be conducted, differently but the same, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
great.
Yeah, and it does bring it's different opportunities, but it brings opportunities to everybody.
Yeah. Well, look, Andy, it's great to see you. Haven't seen you in a long time, and I'm looking forward to the next time we get to be together. I know that a lot of people are anxious to get together. So I hope you and your family are well. I really appreciate you taking time. I think this has been very good conversation. So you have a great day, and look forward to seeing you next time.
And I'm looking forward to hopefully pandemic permitting, being in Dallas for the ARA convention in November.
Excellent. Well, we're looking forward to that. Thank you again, Andy.
All the best. Thanks, Vince.
You too. Bye-bye.